You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today, we are talking with Jesse Crosson, and he just recently was released from prison after spending 19 years, almost 19 years of a 32-year sentence. And he was never supposed to get out until his 32 years were up. It wasn't allowed. There was no parole. And, he applied for clemency and managed to get out. So he's here today to talk to us and tell us his story. And, we're going to talk a little bit about prison reform and, life on the outside, really. So, Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you. When I first saw you on TikTok and everything, I was intrigued by your story. And I'd like for you to share with our listeners, a little bit about your story.
Sure. So, I was kind of that typical kid growing up. My parents got divorced when I was young. Like every kid, I thought I was different or something was wrong with me or I wasn't good enough or all those kind of normal insecurities. But for me, it kind of turned into a search for coping mechanisms. And I, tried to kind of lose myself in reading. I tried to, lose myself in activities. I tried to do something. And then I found drugs and alcohol. And I was like, this is it. This makes me feel smart enough. This makes me feel good enough. This is what I've been looking for all this time. But it also obviously kept me from becoming the person that I wanted to be and had some really negative effects on my life and led to me making some really terrible choices. So just after my 18th birthday, I committed a robbery and a shooting surrounding drugs and the search for drugs and being out of drugs and not being able to get more money and just generally being completely out of my mind. And it was horrible. The consequences of my actions were irreparable harm to a number of people. And that was so hard for me to really recognize because, obviously I made a lot of choices along the way. And there were times in the different things that I did that I felt like there were choices, there were turning points that I could have turned back. But a lot of my life at that point, I felt was almost on autopilot. And it's not that I don't mean to say that I wasn't responsible. It means to say that I felt so out of control at times that I really didn't know, how to stop or how to make a different decision or how to do something. And so that when I was finally arrested, rather than this anger and there was this huge sense of relief because I had wanted to stop. I had wanted to do things differently. I didn't know how. And so being arrested was in some ways an absolute blessing. Well, really, in pretty much all the ways, it was an absolute blessing because I'm pretty sure I would have been dead or somebody else would have been dead if I had, if I had stayed doing what I was doing. But it didn't mean that I was immediately healed and cured and everything was better. I mean, I still kind of went back and forth between this vacillation of just absolute self-pity and absolute shame and guilt and confusion and frustration and anger. And it felt like being on an emotional roller coaster times 1,000. And this was while kind of going through DTs in the jail and struggling to kind of recreate my identity and figure out where I wanted to go and having no idea what that looked like. And in a weird way, initially, there was this sense of at least peace in between all the kind of crazy emotions that hey, at least it can't get any worse than this. I've done a bunch of harm. I've done a lot of things, but at least they stopped me. At least I'm not going to do anything else. And that lasted, because while I was in the jail, my mom was incredibly supportive of my whole incarceration. She was able to enroll me in college classes. I was able to start building relationships. I was okay, I've done this great harm and I can move forward. And then the day of my sentencing, my lawyer had said, look, you're probably going to get 10 years and it's going to be really hard, but it's going to make you a better person. And you just have to make, good use of your time. So that's what I was prepared for. And so the day of my sentencing guidelines were from 8 to 13 years, with 10 years as a midpoint. So that seemed really reasonable. The first motion they did was to change them to 10 to 16 years. And he said, look, I don't want us to object because judge has seen the old sentencing guidelines. So we'll probably take them into account. And, if we do object, we're probably not going to win because they can say this is a case. And I said, okay. So then at sentencing, the judge listed out all the charges and I was doing the math in my head and I realized he just gave me 32 years. And there was this huge, again, that kind of vacillating, but in this place, it was almost divided, a juxtaposed set of emotions. One was self-pity and anger, oh my God, how am I going to do this? This is terrible. And the other was finally, somebody sees what a piece of crap I am. Finally, somebody validates my deepest fears that I am absolutely irredeemable and not worth, being in society or doing anything. And it was weird to look back at the just hopelessness, but also the resignation to like, yeah, this was what I was always meant for, which I think was in some ways my biggest fear. So I was sentenced to 32 years. We went through the appeals process, and there was nothing we can do. Sentencing guidelines in Virginia are discretionary, so the judge can depart from them at will. And so then I was in jail, and I really had to figure out what I was going to do. And then fortunately, rather than sitting in that jail block where we didn't do anything, where I was able to take the college class, but we were locked in a room all day, every day, I was actually able to get transferred to prison. And that was kind of the beginning of this transition of finding myself, of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, of like really good decisions and associations and really bad decisions and associations, and really figuring that out. And it took me a number of years to kind of get traction. And I was kind of flailing and lost and confused. But I did. Eventually, I found myself, I built this pattern of surrounding myself with the best people that I could, both on the inside and the outside. And I noticed that I was changing and my life was getting better and things were improving. And all of a sudden, I was able to help other people. And it just this shift in perspective from self-pity to gratitude, no matter where I was. And I was really fortunate. I had a guy early on who was a mentor, and he taught me 2 things. He assigned me an essay on freedom, and it was one of the most instrumental things that I ever worked on, because it made me realize that freedom is not something that can be taken away. Ultimately, we can look at the physical trappings, we can look at these things, but it ultimately is a choice. If we can be present with where we are, and we can have the presence of mind to make a choice where we are, that really is the only freedom we have, because everything else is temporary. Everything else can be taken away. Everything else beyond our control. And that kind of shifted something in me. I felt like, okay, I am free in this moment to make one decision or the other. I can make a good decision or a bad. I can move towards the kind of healing and the positive things that I want to do, or I can go back into the drugs and the insanity and the craziness. And just having that realization, that sense of like agency, I think it was the first time in my life that I really felt like I had that. And then one of the other things he got me to do was look at gratitude, like just make a list of things that I was grateful for. When I first started, it would be, one thing, and I didn't want to look at that, and I didn't really believe it, but I would write down one thing that I didn't really feel. What I noticed is, as I wrote that down, eventually that one thing that I was writing down seemed a little more real. I was more connected to it. And then I recognized there were more things. And then within years, I had so many things to be grateful for every day that I woke up. It just astounded me, because nothing had changed in my world. It had just changed inside of me and my perspective. And so that was really, along with kind of sobriety and getting into meditation and all these things that came together really allowed me to wake up pretty much every day grateful. And it wasn't that I wasn't sad or I wasn't angry or I wasn't depressed at times. It was that even in that, I could recognize how blessed I was, how fortunate I was, how many opportunities I did have. Because even when I didn't think I was getting out until 2030, I still had a release date. And I was surrounded by guys who didn't. Even though I didn't know what I would do or my future would hold, I had so many opportunities and so many connections and so much support, and so many people around me didn't. And I had seen, people would always say, well, aren't you angry about your sentence and you got this? And I saw people who got much more lenient sentences, and I saw people who got much more strict and unreasonable sentences. And it was one of those things where I recognized, I can't control any of that. Like, I'm not in charge. I didn't get to make that choice. I put myself in this position. Now I kind of have to make the bed, what I made my bed, now lay in it. So it's okay. So how am I going to make the best of this? And that was really where I realized that, trying to share the things that had been given to me was really the only path that was going to allow me to maintain some kind of happiness. Because my whole life I'd been trying to just kind of take and fill myself up and like feed pleasure and feed satisfaction. And that was ultimately the most empty experience I could have. But when I was there and I helped other people, when I connected with other people, when I shared the things that were given to me, I realized like this is much more meaningful and much more satisfying than anything I've ever tried to do of just kind of taking for myself. So I started mentoring, I started tutoring, I started working with other people, designing programs, teaching classes. And it was, it was amazing. Like I had a meaningful life in prison. And before COVID hit, I was in prison with, a job and a teaching position, a mentoring position, and all these things to do, and people that I look forward to seeing, and people who look forward to seeing me, which was not something I was used to from earlier in my life. And I was grateful. And somebody had convinced me to put in a petition for clemency. And I didn't have any expectation that it would actually work. But one of my mentors, what he had said was, he said, look, you're not in charge of the outcome of something. Your job is to do the work and take whatever control you have, do that, and then let go of the outcome. And so that was it. Okay, if I'm going to have to spend all this time in prison, at least I can go with the peace that I've done everything that I could. So I put it in not expecting to get out, but expecting that, I would at least have peace in my heart, knowing that I'd done everything that I could over those years. And then all of a sudden, a reporter wanted to do a story on me because she was highlighting, Virginia after the abolition of parole, and somebody else wanted to interview me, and some of my writing went viral on Facebook, and some of these things just started spreading, and I was like, oh, well, this is weird. And so it started kind of building a seed of hope in me that something could actually happen. And then COVID hit, And COVID was just terrible in prison because, being locked down and not being able to work and not being able to volunteer, and then getting transferred from where I'd worked my way. It took me 12 years to get to the honor pod, where I actually had a single cell, being transferred to an institution that was just an 80-man or 82-man open dormitory. And it was the most unpleasant 10 months of my life. But at the same time, I developed this amazing relationship with that same reporter who had reported on me previously, who was no longer at the TV station. My life just started kind of coming together. And then all of a sudden in August of last year, they called me in the counselor's office and said, Mr. Crosson, you're getting out of Coffeewood today. You're going home. And it was, I don't even know how to describe, other than the fact that I remember my knee hitting the floor and I remember tears hitting my eyes, and just this amazing opportunity that I didn't ever really believe in, or I was almost afraid to believe in, was suddenly a reality. And an hour and a half later, I walked out, and for the first time in a year and a half since COVID started, I was able to give my mom a hug. And then I was able to meet Courtney, the reporter that did the story on me, for the first time in person. And like my life, I hate to say my real life, because I don't mean to demean the experience in prison, because I think it has the potential to be an amazing experience. And it's certainly where I grew up and I learned a lot of the things that I know, but it feels like my real life began. It feels like I woke up from a bad dream and I'm now able to engage in the world in the most meaningful way I could have imagined.
Wow. That's incredible. And I can imagine, what you mean. I can't really relate because I've never been in prison, but, when you say your real life began, because in prison, you were a kid when you went in, and, it's not like you get to really make a lot of your own choices in there. A lot of those choices are made for you, right? Whereas now that you're out, you can actually make your own choices and decisions now.
And it's funny, though, because that was in some ways the most overwhelming part. I had a breakdown at Costco the first day, and people say, well, there aren't that many things to choose from. I was like, are you kidding me? I had the shoes on my feet and the clothes on my back, and that was it. And I was supposed to start a life at 36 years old. Like, I didn't have anything. I didn't know. I was so overwhelmed by the prospect of saying, okay, I need to buy boxers and socks. I can comprehend that far, but I need to buy clothes. I need to buy tools. Do I need to buy clothes hangers? Am I going to have clothes to put on hangers? Like, am I going to have somewhere to put clothes hangers? Like, I have no idea what's going on. And it was that choice and that opportunity that was so overwhelming, because I had so many or so few options and so many limited kind of opportunities in prison, that I was almost kind of stuck in that mindset. I think of there was I think it was a tiger in a zoo out in San Diego who had been in this tiny little cage, and they built him this huge enclosure. And the idea was, he'll be able to go and run. And once they took the cage away, he still just paced that same dirt, because he was so accustomed to the kind of trappings of the environment that he was in. And I was afraid of becoming that guy. I didn't want to become the person who was institutionalized and never engaged with the world. And I'm really grateful that I've had just the amazing support that I have, that's allowed me to kind of come out of that shell and push through that discomfort and engage in a way that I think a lot of people don't.
Yeah, I've heard other people talk about, their first few days or their first few weeks out after being incarcerated for a very long time. And they are just completely overwhelmed by colors and sounds and smells, because you just, you have your four walls and that's it. So yeah, it's almost like you're living in a little bubble, and then all of a sudden that bubble pops, and it's like, oh my God, that's what the world is like. So it has to be complete culture shock.
It definitely was.
I meant to pull that up. I saw a story the other day about a kid. I want to say he went into prison or went into the system around age 13 for killing an 8-year-old. And he did 40 years or something like that. And they're letting him go. And I was looking at this and I was like, I can't even begin to fathom the amount of culture shock that this guy is going to go through after spending his entire life in jail. That transition has got to just be brutal, absolutely brutal. But are there programs out there for newly released inmates that help you adjust and reintegrate? Or do they just say, here's the stuff you came in with, hasta la vista, don't come back?
Well, and you don't even have the stuff you came in with. That was sent home, almost 20 years ago.
Oh, geez.
But
okay.
no, Unfortunately, that's the problem. There really isn't. There's no kind of set transitional service. There's no real reentry program. And they have some things in place that there's one cognitive behavioral program that's in place that I think may help to a certain degree. But one of my main criticisms of that is cognitive behavioral therapy is great if you are a perfectly healthy, whole individual. If you're traumatized, it can be harmful. And addressing the thought patterns is not addressing the trauma. It's not addressing the emotional regulation issues. It's not addressing any of the things that drove 99% of us to go to prison in the first place. But there really is not a lot of support. And again, I was so lucky. And people say, oh, well, what makes you different? Why were you successful when other people weren't? I said, well, because I had a tremendous support network. I had a home to go to. I had people who would help me go get clothes. I had people who would help me get transportation and get work and find my way through the world. And very few people have that. Most people go from prison to this scarcity mentality of literally wondering where they're going to sleep and what they're going to eat and how they're going to survive. And then expecting them to kind of heal and adjust in a healthy way while literally in the middle of kind of existential angst is just, it's impossible. But I get these main responses when I talk about these on social media. People say, well, you shouldn't have gone to prison in the first place. And it's like, I agree. And healthy, whole people don't make decisions that lead them to prison for violent crimes. I completely agree. But once we've taken someone who clearly wasn't healthy enough to make good decisions in the first place, stuck them in prison for 20 or 30 or 40 years, and then let them out without support, how do we expect them to succeed? Do we think that sticking somebody in a box is somehow going to make them healthy and better and well? The fact that we're not focusing on rehabilitation, that we're not focusing on healing the wounds that led people to act in the ways that they did to go to prison means we're actually encouraging people to fail. We're not actually giving people a second chance. And I think it's just such a tragedy because I understand that anger, the kind of punishment mentality, the place where people say, well, you have to pay for what you did. And that's fine. If you want to lock people away, I agree. But it is in everybody's benefit to give people the treatment they need while they're inside, to focus on trauma-informed care, to focus on addiction treatment, to focus on the most fundamental things that they need. Give people job skills so that the trauma of poverty is not the thing that defines their lives when they get out, as it often was when they went in. But again, that mentality, it's I don't understand how we're having two different discussions. I'll talk to people and there's just so much anger and there's so much frustration. And I try to listen to it and I try to validate it because it's obviously coming from a place of need. And whatever that need is they're expressing, I try to see it and I try to acknowledge it. But it's just really unfortunate that we are focusing on something that is really further traumatizing people and really further increasing the likelihood of recidivism, which is creating a new victim. Saying, oh, well, you'll just go back to prison. That's great. It's not just that person that's affected. It's everyone he hurts along the way. And if we're actually trying to prevent crime, if we're actually trying to prevent the creation of new victims, we need to give people the tools they need to succeed.
Absolutely. So, I watch a lot of prison shows on TV and stuff, which, of course it gives you just a glimpse of whatever the TV channel wants you to see, like 60 days in and stuff like that. So you only get like a bird's eye view of what really goes on in the system. But one of the shows that I like to watch is hosted by Raphael Rowe. And he did, I want to say 19 years in the UK for a crime he didn't commit. Actually, I think it was 12 years for a crime he didn't commit. And one of the shows that he has is called Inside the World's Toughest Prisons. And it's fascinating to see the prison systems around the world. And of course, you have, some of your countries like Colombia and all that, where, it is just your worst nightmare. But then there's countries like Norway, who their prison systems are absolutely amazing. And it's, they're not treated like subhuman. They have, fairly decent cells. They actually have kitchens where they can cook their own food. They learn a skill, they learn a trade. And, that way, when it's time for them to go back out into the world, they have something to fall back on. And, I don't know a whole lot about the prison system here in America, but from my limited knowledge, I think there's a few prisons or jails out there that kind of do that. But I think most of them just kind of, lock you up and say, here you go. You got to just, tough it out until we say it's time to go. And they don't really help you inside or outside. And I agree with you. I think if they would take the time to create more programs to work with the inmates, I think we would see definitely a lot less recidivism. That's a hard word to say, but I think we would just see an enormous change in our societies.
I completely agree. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm on social media. I'm advocating is if I can tell my stories and that will prevent one kid from making the same stupid decisions that I did or kind of going down that path, then it's worth it. If I can help support the family members of somebody who's locked up and help give him or her the encouragement they need to take advantage of whatever time they have and do the best they can with it so they don't go back, like that would make it worth it. Or if I can help just highlight what is broken and what could be so much better, not just, oh, we need to give prisoners better or whatever. No, better for everybody, better for society, better for the prevention of future crimes, better for, a strong tax base where people are willing to get out. They have the skills to be employed. They have the skill to pay taxes and contribute. I mean, if I can do any one of those things, and hopefully I can do all those things, then I will have taken this opportunity, this horrible thing that I did, and this really difficult experience, and turn it into something meaningful. Really, I think that's all we have the opportunity to do. Once we've made a mistake, there's no taking it back. There's no changing what we've done, but we can try to find a way to contribute or use it in a kind of a healing way, rather than continuing to feel that self-pity or continuing to kind of feed into that negativity. Absolutely.
I mean, you definitely were lucky. You got a good mentor early on. And, I think so many people don't get that inside. It's certainly not something the prison provides. So, you definitely, I want to say you were there for a reason, a greater purpose. That sounds kind of shitty, but, I guess it's kind of looking at the silver lining. You found this incredible mentor. You were able to really turn your life around, go to college, get a degree. You even started a business while you were in there, right? That prison?
Well, yeah, it's not a profitable business. We just started it because we wanted to have something to run things through. But yeah, we started a podcast. We started a platform that we were going to share the stories and the artwork of prisoners to try to essentially humanize them and show that their struggles are real. And that at the same time that, again, I really struggle with this because I don't want people to think that I'm only highlighting prisoners and only thinking that they need help. I think one of the other failures of our system is that victims don't get the resources or the treatment or the support that they need. And that absolutely needs to be addressed. I can only speak from my lived experience. And that's why I would actually like to partner with, a group like a victim impact group that's working to say, hey, this is better for everybody. Because a lot of the mindset that I have came from a victim impact program that I went through where this woman who came in had been a victim of crime. And I said, look, as someone who has committed a horrible crime, what can I do? Like, what would make you feel better? What would be the thing you want most from the person that hurt you? And she said, just don't do it again. Just make the changes, do whatever you have to do to not ever do it again to anyone else. And that's a very easy baseline, right? That's the thing that we can start with. But then realizing, okay, if that's the focus, if that's what a victim really wants, rather than just kind of punishment and this horrible castigation, well, I can focus on that. And I can focus on promoting people having access to the tools that will help them not make the same choices and not make the same mistakes and not react in the same ways that they have in the past. And that's one of the main failures of our criminal justice system. We focus entirely on the perpetrator of a crime. And by focusing on the perpetrator of crime, we're not addressing the needs of the victim and we're not addressing the needs of the community. We're focused on punishment. And by doing so, we're failing to take into account that the victim needs healing. And in many cases, the victim would rather have a reform or restorative justice process than a punitive process, but they often aren't given that option because there aren't restorative justice programs everywhere in the country. And so it's really unfortunate that we say we're doing this for the victim, but often we're not listening to the actual needs or requests or desires of the victim. We're not giving them the support they need. We're not addressing the community issues that caused this in the first, I don't want to say caused this in the individual, but it created the environment where this is so common.
Right.
So we're kind of focused on the punitive side and only one person in really a three-part equation.
Right. Well, in our last few minutes, Jesse, let's kind of talk a little bit about, any of our listeners that are out there who may have somebody inside that is maybe getting ready to come out, or even, just going in, or somebody who has just recently come out themselves. What advice do you have? Let's start with, family members and supporters of inmates. What can they do to help their loved ones that are on the inside?
I'm only where I am today because people believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And they loved me until I could love myself. They helped me find a way to move forward when I just felt absolutely hopeless. So giving people that love and that support, and I don't mean just enabling bad behavior, but I mean giving them your love, giving them your time, encouraging them, enabling opportunities for education or for healing, whatever that is. If you can show up for somebody, if you can accept that phone call, if you can encourage them, if you can connect them with resources that may help, that was what allowed me to turn my life around. And I couldn't have done it without them. I don't believe I would be here where I am today if it hadn't been for that. And again, part of that is accountability. Part of that is recognizing, hey, you're not doing what you said you were going to do, and that's not okay. You know, we made this agreement. I'm going to help you go to school. I'm going to help send you money for commissary. I'm going to whatever, but I need you to do your part. I need you to take advantage of this opportunity because you may not have the resources, the programs you need, but you have time, and time gives you the choice and the opportunity to do something with it. Are you going to sit around? Are you going to watch TV? Are you going to play spades all day? Or are you going to do something to better yourself? And giving people that kind of structure and that kind of support will allow them to kind of find that, you know, when they're lost. And I think oftentimes we're just looking for a trail, like we're looking for the path to go on. And the path that someone is laying in front of us is often the one we're going to take. And without that support, I far too often saw guys follow the path into a gang life or follow the path into just a professional prisoner life, because that was where they got the support. That was where they got the immediate kind of gratification and satisfaction, because it is easier to do that. It's a lot easier to join a gang. It's a lot easier to be a professional prisoner and not worry about the future and stay high and not have to deal with the pain and the discomfort. But if you have the support and you make the choices that allow you to grow, you're going to end up in a much better position when you finally get out.
Absolutely. And what about those who are, just coming out and they, they have to adjust somehow? What are some things that you would recommend that you wish you had known maybe when you first came out, that would have made your transition a little bit easier and a little less overwhelming?
Take it slow would be my first advice, because it is so overwhelming. It is so much to consider and kind of tackle. I thought I was going to get straight out and go straight into grad school and do this. And I realized I was having trouble with the most basic things. The first time I went into a store alone, I had another panic attack because I was looking around for who's supposed to make this decision for me. How am I going to do that? It is so overwhelming in a way that I didn't even imagine, and I couldn't have, or I don't know that you can prepare for. But taking it slow, breaking it down into little bite-sized pieces that are actually doable, and then having that transition into a greater sense of responsibility and a greater sense of choice and a greater sense of, what direction do I want my life to take, has been really, really instrumental in me being able to maintain that balance where I don't feel so overwhelmed and out of control. And I still feel overwhelmed and out of control, currently, because I have so much going on. And sure. I think it's the same thing, taking it slow, trying to do advocacy work, trying to work, basically 50 some hours a week, trying to work with other people, trying to network, trying to, do things at the legislature. It's a really difficult thing to take so much on. And I'm having to learn to say no. And after so many years of not having enough to do, saying no to something that's meaningful or that I want to do is really difficult. But I'm realizing that my mental health kind of demands it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not always no, it's also not now,
Yeah.
That's a great idea. I can't do it right now. We'll do this in 6 months or something like that. So, it's definitely recognizing your own limitations. So, well, Jesse, thank you so much for coming on and, sharing your story and talking with us today. This has been really, really fascinating. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Listeners, I will have all of Jesse's contact information in the show notes. As always, just go to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up Jesse's episode, and all his contact information will be there. If you have questions or, you want to help, whatever, definitely reach out and, Jesse be glad to point you in the right direction. So thank you again, Jesse, and listeners, as always, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you in the next show. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.